The first time I realized the rules weren't really rules. I was standing in my driveway holding a yellow warning tag like it was a parking ticket from God. It was tied to my trash can handle, bright, smug, fluttering in the morning breeze, like the neighborhood itself had decided to scold me before I'd even had my coffee. Container violation. Trash receptacles must not be visible from the street outside approved collection hours. Approved hours. That phrase sounds harmless until you learn it can be used like a hammer. I'm telling this story because selective enforcement is the quietest way an HOA takes control. If you believe no one should be singled out in their own neighborhood, please hit that subscribe button right now. Your support helps us reach more homeowners who are fighting these same battles alone. Now, let's look at exactly how they documented my life while ignoring everyone else. I had moved into Maple Briar Estates 2 years earlier because I wanted quiet. Not excitement, not drama, not a new chapter full of characters who needed their own spin-off show. Just quiet. A small yard, a decent porch, a place where my knees could rest and my mind could too. I'm not naive. I knew what it meant to be a Black woman buying a home in a neighborhood where nearly every family photo on every mantel looked like it came from the same catalog. I expected polite distance, the kind of welcome that is technically friendly but emotionally locked. What I did not expect was a rulebook that seemed to develop a pulse whenever I stepped outside. The trash can was the beginning. I moved it out early because I had a doctor appointment that morning. Early as in, the sun was barely up. The birds were still stretching their throats. Nobody was out there but me, the dew, and my old Labrador, King, waddling along like he had places to be. But somehow, within hours, I had a warning. I walked around the block later that afternoon, still holding that tag, and I saw 3 other trash cans sitting right out in the open. One was at the curb like it owned the curb. Another was tipped over, lid half off like it had been partying all night. No tags, no warnings, just my driveway wearing the letter V for violation. I told myself not to go there mentally. Not yet. Maybe mine was the only one visible from a certain angle. Maybe someone complained. Maybe the property manager happened to pass by, so I followed the instructions. I set reminders. I became the kind of person who moved a trash can like it was a sacred ritual. Then came the next notice. Yard maintenance, lawn edges must be trimmed, overgrowth detected. Overgrowth? My grass was cut, my edges were neat. My yard wasn't a jungle. It was a yard, modest, clean, alive. But the notice came with a photo attached. And that's when I felt my stomach do that slow drop like an elevator cable had snapped. The photo wasn't taken from the street. It was taken from inside the neighborhood, angled sideways, zoomed in, as if the person holding the camera had stopped walking, stepped closer, and leaned toward my property with intention. Not a casual glance, a decision. I stared at the picture a long time. It showed one little corner near the side fence where a few weeds had dared to live for 3 days. 3 days. I walked the block again, slower this time. I looked at other yards the way I'd never wanted to look at other yards. Searching, comparing, measuring, and I found them. A front bed with weeds tall enough to wave hello. A yard with a dead shrub that had been dead so long it looked historic. A fence leaning like it was tired of standing. No notices, no photos, no letters, just me back home cleaning my overgrowth like I was scrubbing a stain off my reputation. By the 3rd notice, I wasn't confused anymore. I was watching. The 3rd notice wasn't about my yard. It wasn't about trash. It was about my front door. I had painted it a deep navy, elegant, clean, not loud. It was the color of calm water at night. It matched the stone. It matched the shutters. It made the house look cared for. The notice said, "Exterior color compliance, front door color must be approved. Submit request or restore to permitted tones." Permitted tones. I turned my head slowly and looked across the street. Linda, HOA president, board chair, neighborhood queen of concern. had a door that was not navy, not beige, not earth tone anything. Her door was red, not brick red, not tasteful red, red like a stop sign, red like an alarm, red like it wanted attention, and nobody said a word about it. I stood on my porch holding that letter, and I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger yet, not fully, more like the early warning signs of a storm that hasn't decided if it's going to be rain or a tornado. I did what responsible people do when they're trying to stay sane. I went to the HOA documents. I printed the bylaws. I read the guidelines. I highlighted sections like I was studying for an exam called How to Keep Your Own Home. And the more I read, the more I realized the rules were written like fog. There were statements like, must maintain aesthetic harmony, must preserve neighborhood character, must avoid nuisance conditions. Those aren't rules, those are feelings, and feelings can be aimed like weapons. I requested an approval for the door, I submitted photos, I explained it matched existing tones. I was polite, always polite. The response came back in 3 days, denied. No explanation, just denied, so I repainted. I stood there with a brush in my hand, watching navy disappear into approved beige, and I felt something that surprised me. Not sadness, humiliation, because it wasn't about the color. It was about the message. You may live here, but you will not shape anything here. That week, I attended the HOA meeting. I wore a clean blouse, simple jewelry, and my calm face. I walked into that clubhouse like I belonged there, because I did. My name was on the deed. My money paid the dues. My life was anchored to that address. But the room didn't look at me like I belonged. They looked at me like I was a guest who overstayed. Linda sat at the front with a binder, a little microphone, and the kind of smile that only exists when someone enjoys power but refuses to admit it. When it was time for homeowner concerns, I raised my hand. My voice didn't shake. I said, I want to understand enforcement. I've received multiple notices in the last 60 days. I'm trying to comply, but I'm noticing similar issues on other properties that don't seem to be receiving notices. Can someone explain how violations are documented? I didn't say the word unfair. I didn't say targeted. I didn't accuse anybody of anything. I asked the question the way a mature adult asks a question when they still believe there's a reasonable answer. Linda leaned into her microphone and said, "We enforce as needed." As needed. The room nodded like that meant something. I said, "Who decides what's needed?" Linda's smile held, but it sharpened. "The board follows community standards." Community standards. That was the second time I felt my chest tighten. Because I finally understood something I'd been trying not to understand. The rules weren't meant to keep the neighborhood neat. The rules were meant to keep the neighborhood controlled. And control always needs a target. As the meeting ended, I walked out behind a couple who'd been whispering the whole time. The man glanced at me and smiled politely, like you smile at someone standing too close at the grocery store. Then he said to his wife, soft, but not soft enough, "Some people just don't fit the culture here." I didn't turn around. I didn't react, but inside me, something clicked into place like a lock, because that was the truth. That was the word they never wrote in the bylaws, culture. And suddenly every notice made sense. Not because I was breaking rules, but because I was challenging comfort simply by being visible. That night, I went for a walk at dusk. I passed the red door. I passed the leaning fence. I passed the trash cans left out like they'd been adopted by the curb. And I took pictures, one by one, not angrily, not dramatically, just steadily. Because if the rules were going to be fog, then I was going to become a lighthouse. And I had a feeling deep in my bones that what came next wouldn't be about trash or paint. It would be about whether they could pressure me into shrinking. And I've spent my whole life learning one thing the hard way. When people want you smaller, it's rarely about what you did. It's about who you are. By the time the fourth notice arrived, I wasn't even surprised. I was tired. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from living under invisible supervision. It's not the loud stress of a crisis. It's the slow drain of always wondering what will be wrong next. My mail started to feel heavier, like every envelope had rocks inside. This notice was about my porch decor. Unapproved items. Porch decorations exceed permitted limits. Remove within seven days. My porch decor. That made me laugh at first, one short, bitter laugh that came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Because what decorations were they talking about? A small bench, 2 flower pots, a welcome mat, and 1 wind chime, nothing metal, nothing obnoxious, just a soft sound like someone brushing past a curtain. I walked across the street to Linda's house the next day. Linda's porch looked like a magazine spread. Lanterns, wreaths, seasonal signs, decorative pillows, little metal sculptures shaped like birds, and a bench that looked more expensive than my first car. I stood there for 10 seconds. Then I walked away. Not because I was scared of her, because I was scared of what I was becoming. I didn't want to be the woman who stood around measuring other people's porch pillows. I didn't want to become a neighborhood detective. That wasn't why I bought my house. That wasn't the dream. But the dream had already been interrupted, and the rules were forcing me into a role I never auditioned for. So I did what I'd learned to do in life when I felt cornered. I got organized. I made a folder on my computer called HOA. Then I made subfolders. Notices, photos, communications, rules/bylaws, evidence. I printed every email and saved every PDF. I started logging dates. Because I had realized something terrifying. If you don't document reality, someone else will rewrite it for you. A week later, I got my first fine, $25. It was for failure to cure the porch violation. The porch violation I had cured. I had removed 1 flower pot and moved the bench 6 inches. I had even taken a photo and emailed it politely with the subject line, "Confirmation of compliance." No reply, just a fine. So I replied again, attaching the photo, asking for clarification. Still polite, still calm. Their response came the next day. "Board has determined compliance is not sufficient. Further action required." Further action. That's how it started. Not with a big threat, not with a dramatic confrontation, just little pressure points, tiny squeezes. And the odd thing was, nobody raised their voice. Nobody said anything openly mean. They stayed professional, smiling, administrative, like a machine. And machines are dangerous when they don't have to feel what they're doing. Another fine came the next week. Another $25. Then $50. Then a processing fee. Then administrative review. The totals started climbing in that way that doesn't feel real until you do the math and realize you're paying to be disliked. One afternoon, I caught the property manager in my driveway. He was standing near my side fence, clipboard in hand, looking at my yard like it was a suspicious package. I stepped outside. King followed, tail wagging because King still believed in people. "Hello," I said. "Can I help you?" He jumped a little like he hadn't expected me to exist. "Oh, hi, just doing a routine check." Routine, that word again. I said, "Can you tell me what you're checking for?" He looked down at his clipboard, avoiding my eyes. "Compliance." I took a breath and said, "I've been receiving notices and fines, but I'm seeing similar issues on other properties. I'm trying to understand why enforcement seems uneven." He shifted his weight. "I can't speak on board decisions." I said, "Who can?" He hesitated. "You can bring it up at the next meeting." I had already brought it up, but fine. I did it again. At the next meeting, I brought printed photos. I laid them out on the table like a quiet courtroom. I didn't label them with addresses. I didn't name names. I wasn't trying to start a feud. I said, "These are examples of the same categories of issues I've been cited for: trash containers, visible items, yard conditions. I'm asking for a consistent standard." Silence. Linda's eyes flicked over the photos like she was scanning for a mistake she could pounce on. Then she said, "We don't discuss other homeowners' matters." Other homeowners' matters. So what were my matters? public entertainment. I said, I'm not asking for private information, I'm asking for equal enforcement. Linda smiled like she was offering me a gift. We enforce equally. There it was, the perfect lie, simple, complete, and impossible to prove without turning into the kind of person who records everything like they're living in a spy movie. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my folder, my logs, my photos, my emails. I realized I didn't just need evidence, I needed a strategy, because the HOA wasn't operating on fairness. They were operating on something else. Pressure, isolation, time. They wanted me to get tired. They wanted me to give up. They wanted me to sell. And I could feel it in the way neighbors acted now. How conversations stopped when I walked up. How people nodded but didn't linger. How someone who used to wave from across the street suddenly became fascinated with their mailbox whenever I came outside. Nobody was openly hostile. That's what made it worse. This wasn't hatred. This was permission. A community quietly agreeing that I could be singled out as long as it stayed polite. Then came the letter that changed the temperature. Notice of hearing. Continued noncompliance may result in legal action and lien placement. Lien. That word makes your home feel like it's not yours anymore. I sat there staring at it, imagining strangers putting a price tag on my peace. I didn't tell my kids right away. I didn't want to worry them. They had their lives, their jobs, their stress. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that man's voice from the HOA meeting. Some people don't fit the culture. And I started thinking about all the ways culture gets enforced in America without anyone ever saying it out loud. The next morning, I drove through the neighborhood slowly. I saw a basketball hoop overhanging the sidewalk. I saw a shed that looked unapproved. I saw 3 trash cans out early. I saw holiday lights still hanging in February. And I felt something that was equal parts rage and clarity. If they could make rules bend for everyone else, then the rules were not the point. The point was me. So I made an appointment with an attorney. Not because I wanted a fight, because I wanted oxygen. Because I could feel the walls closing in, and I refused to let my home become a cage built out of paperwork and polite smiles. And as I drove to that appointment, one thought kept repeating in my head like a drumbeat. If I'm the only one being punished, then somebody needs to explain why, on the record. The attorney's office smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee, the scent of a place where people come when they've run out of friendly options. I sat across from her, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, and I slid my folder onto her desk. She didn't smile. She didn't act shocked. She just said, "Tell me the timeline." So I did. Trash can, lawn edges, door color, porch decor, fines, hearing notice, lien threat. And while I talked, she flipped through my documents like she'd seen this movie before. When I finished, she tapped the table lightly and said, "Unequal enforcement can be challenged. But it's not about what you feel, it's about what you can show." I nodded. "That's why I took pictures." She looked up. "Good." Then she said something that landed heavy. HOAs usually don't back down because someone complains. They back down when someone creates risk. Risk. I understood that word, not as fear but as leverage. The next step was a records request. In my state, certain HOA records, meeting minutes, violation logs, enforcement policies could be requested by a homeowner. Not always easily, but legally. So we sent a formal letter. No anger. No accusations. Just a request. The violation log for the past 18 months, the enforcement policy and procedures, photos used for violations, board meeting minutes where enforcement decisions were discussed, communications regarding my property. The HOA responded with a delay. Then another delay. Then a message that said, "Records are being compiled." Compiled. Like they were building a story. That's when my attorney advised me to do something I didn't want to do, but I did it anyway. We notified them that continued delays could be interpreted as obstruction under their own governing documents and state law. Suddenly, the records arrived within a week. I opened the package at my kitchen table, hands steady, heart racing. It was thick, pages and pages, and within 10 minutes I found the first crack in their perfect professionalism. The violation log was a spreadsheet. Addresses, dates, violation type, and action taken. I scrolled, and my mouth went dry because the pattern wasn't subtle. My address appeared over and over like a drumbeat. Other addresses appeared occasionally like background noise. Then I saw something that made me sit back in my chair. The address with the constant trash cans, logged once. No action taken, the house with the dead shrub, logged. Courtesy only. The leaning fence, logged. Owner notified verbally. No fine. My porch bench, logged. Fine, follow-up. Fine, escalation. Hearing, my door color, logged. Immediate enforcement. It wasn't just unequal enforcement. It was documented unequal enforcement. Then I found the photos. Not all of them, but enough. Mine were crisp, close, intentional, multiple angles, evidence gathering. Others were vaguely taken from far away, blurry, incomplete, like the person taking them didn't really care, or wasn't told to care. Then came the meeting minutes. This was where I expected to find nothing. Minutes are often written like they're trying to say a lot while saying nothing. But there it was, one line that shouldn't have been there. A board note. Concern raised about maintaining neighborhood character due to visible changes. Visible changes. That phrase made my skin prickle. Because what visible changes were we talking about? A bench, a door color, a trash can. Or the fact that when I moved in, the block looked one way and now it looked another. I didn't have to guess. Because the email chain, partially included by mistake, had a message from Linda to the property manager. She wrote, "Please monitor 1427 closely. We need to be proactive." Proactive. I stared at that line so long my eyes started to ache. Proactive meant they had chosen me in advance. Not because I was breaking rules worse than anyone else, but because they wanted to make sure I stayed on a short leash. My attorney didn't tell me to calm down. She didn't tell me to be patient. She said, "Now we act." We sent the HOA a letter. Still no accusations. Still no emotional language, just facts. We cited the enforcement log, the inconsistencies, the documented fines, the escalating actions on me compared to courtesy only for others. We requested immediate removal of fines and cancellation of the hearing. We also requested an explanation of why my property was singled out for proactive monitoring. And we gave them a deadline. They responded with their usual tone, cold, polite, administrative. They claimed they enforced equally. They claimed the logs didn't tell the full story. They claimed I was misinterpreting their process. My attorney replied with one sentence that changed everything. "Then please provide the full story under oath during discovery." Discovery. That's the word that turns polite bullies into nervous people, because discovery means subpoenas. Depositions, records, testimony. It means the fog gets pulled apart. A week later, my fines were reviewed. 2 weeks later, they were waived. My hearing was canceled as a courtesy. A courtesy, after months of pressure, after threats of a lien, after making me repaint my door like my taste was a crime. They wanted to pretend this was them being generous. But I knew what it was. It was retreat. Then something happened I didn't expect. A neighbor knocked on my door. It was Marlene, an older white woman who lived 2 houses down. She'd always nodded politely but never lingered. That day, she looked uncomfortable, like she'd swallowed a secret. She said, "I heard they dropped your fines." I didn't invite her in. I didn't need company, but I stepped onto the porch. I said, "They did." She hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry, I should have said something earlier." I waited. She looked at her hands. "Linda, she talks. She's been saying you're difficult." Difficult. That word, so small, so loaded. I said, "Difficult because I asked for equal enforcement." Marlene's face tightened. "She says you're changing things." Changing things. The same phrase, different mouth. I nodded slowly. And for the first time, I said it out loud to someone in that neighborhood. I'm not changing anything by existing. Marlene looked away, ashamed. She didn't have the courage to agree fully, but she had enough courage to stand there and hear me. And that mattered more than she realized. Because this is the part people don't talk about. Unequal enforcement isn't only about the board. It's about the neighborhood agreeing to look away. I didn't sue, not because I couldn't. Because once the fines were removed and the monitoring stopped, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them drag me into years of stress. But I did something else. I ran for the board. Yes, me, the woman who didn't fit the culture. I didn't campaign like a politician. I didn't beg. I didn't posture. I simply told the truth. I said rules should be clear, consistent, and equally enforced. If they're not, they become tools of control. Some people avoided me. Some people whispered. But a few people, quiet people, nodded. Because a lot of folks are fine with unfairness until it touches them. And then suddenly they remember fairness is a thing. On election night, I didn't win by a landslide. But I won. One seat, one voice, one crack in the machine. Linda's smile that night was the tightest I'd ever seen it. And as I walked back to my car under the streetlights, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Not because I had beaten them at their game, but because I had refused to shrink. They tried to punish me without ever accusing me. They tried to make me feel guilty without ever saying the real reason. They tried to make me tired enough to disappear. And the strangest part, all I did was ask for the same rules they promised. That's it. That's the difficulty. So if you're living under a system where the rules only wake up when you walk outside, remember this. The moment you document, the moment you request records, the moment you insist on consistency, you stop being an easy target. Because unfairness survives best in silence. And I'm done being silent in my own home.